Welcome to your personal deep dive. Today, we're diving into viticulture, all about growing grapes. You've sent us some great material to get started.
It is a fascinating world.
Yeah.
We were talking grape varieties and those pesky pests and diseases.
And even I hear maybe some cosmic philosophy.
Oh, absolutely.
Huh.
We'll even get into biodynamic farming.
Okay, I am intrigued. So where do we begin this deep dive?
Well, with grapes, of course.
Yeah.
And most of the wine we drink comes from a single species, Vitis vinifera, but there are thousands of varieties.
Thousands. Wow, that's a lot of grapes.
It is, and each variety has its own unique characteristics, its own flavor profile, its own ideal growing conditions.
So like some grapes prefer it hot, some like it cold kind of thing.
Exactly. And then there's the whole world of rootstock, which most people don't even realize is there, but it's absolutely essential for growing those Vitis vinifera grapes.
Rootstock. Remind me about that.
It's like the foundation of the vine, literally. We graft Vitis vinifera vines onto rootstock from other grape species, mostly American grapes.
American grapes? But I thought those weren't good for making wine.
Well, you're right. They're not usually preferred for winemaking, but they have something European vines don't, resistance to phylloxera.
Phylloxera, that tiny bug that almost wiped out European vineyards back in the 19th century.
The one and only. It's a story that every wine lover should know. It's a tale of devastation, resilience, and ultimately human ingenuity.
Okay, so set the scene for me. What happened?
Picture this. It's the mid-1800s, and European vineyards are flourishing. Then seemingly overnight disaster strikes. Vines start withering and dying, and nobody knows why.
Like a scene from a horror movie, a silent killer spreading through the vineyards.
It really was. And the culprit turned out to be phylloxera, a tiny aphid-like insect that had hitched a ride from North America on some imported vines.
So this tiny bug almost brought the world of wine as we know it to its knees.
It almost did. European vines had no defense against this new enemy, and it spread like wildfire.
That's terrifying. So how did they stop it? Did they find some kind of pesticide or something?
Well, they tried everything they could think of. But the solution came from a surprising source, the very place where phylloxera originated, American grapevines.
American grapes coming to the rescue.
Exactly. While American grapes themselves weren't ideal for winemaking, they had something European vines desperately needed: resistance to phylloxera.
So they had evolved alongside this pest and developed their own defense mechanisms.
Precisely. They had thicker root bark and a sticky sap that prevented phylloxera from feeding properly.
So the solution was to combine the delicious European grapes with the pest-resistant American roots.
You got it. Grafting European Vitis vinifera vines onto these resistant American rootstocks became the savior of European viticulture.
What a brilliant solution. It just goes to show you how important understanding grape varieties and rootstocks is to winemaking.
It's absolutely fundamental. It's all happening below the surface, literally, and it has a huge impact on the wine we drink.
I never thought about it that way. It's like the roots are the unsung heroes of the wine world.
They really are. And speaking of variety, your material dives into the fascinating world of how new grapes are developed.
Oh yeah, I was curious about that. How do you create new grape varieties?
Well, the traditional method is through crossbreeding. You take pollen from one grape variety and fertilize the flower of another.
So like a little bit of botanical matchmaking.
Exactly. And sometimes the results are quite surprising.
Hmm.
Like, did you know that Cabernet Sauvignon is a child of Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc?
No way! So Cabernet Sauvignon is like a family reunion in a bottle.
It really is. And this discovery was made through DNA analysis, which is being used more and more to unravel the complex relationships between grape varieties.
So it's like a family tree, but for grapes.
Exactly. And sometimes those family trees have some unexpected branches.
Mm-hmm.
But developing a new grape variety isn't easy. It takes a lot of time and patience.
I bet. I imagine it's kind of like creating a new song. You have to experiment and tweak and see what works.
A good analogy. And then once you have a new variety, it's not like it automatically becomes popular.
Yeah, it takes time to win over wine drinkers' hearts and palates, I guess.
Definitely. Consumers can be quite attached to familiar names, just like with anything else.
I can relate to that. But even within a single grape variety, there's even more nuance, right? You mentioned clones earlier.
Oh, yes. Clones are fascinating. They're essentially slight variations within a grape variety.
So like different shades of Cabernet Sauvignon?
In a way, yes. Sometimes a natural mutation will occur in a vine, and that mutation might result in better fruit quality or disease resistance or a slightly different flavor profile.
Interesting. So growers can select these superior vines and propagate them through cuttings to preserve those desirable traits.
Exactly. They're essentially choosing the best version of a grape variety for their specific needs and goals.
So it's all about fine-tuning and adapting, constantly striving for the best possible grapes.
That's the heart of viticulture. It's a beautiful blend of science, art, and intuition.
Okay, I'm ready to dive deeper into the grapevine itself. Your material mentioned the yearly growth cycle, right? What are the key stages we need to know?
Well, it all starts with dormancy in the winter, when the vines are essentially sleeping. Then as temperatures warm up in the spring, we have bud burst, a truly magical time for any grape grower.
I bet. It's like nature's reset button promising new life and delicious grapes.
Exactly. And those tiny buds eventually develop into shoots and leaves. Then comes flowering, followed by fruit set, where those tiny grapes start to form.
So it's like a slow and steady build up to the main event.
It is. And then we have veraison, which is a visual reminder that harvest is approaching.
Brazen. What's that?
It's when the grapes change color. So those beautiful reds and golden hues start to appear, signaling that the grapes are ripening and developing those delicious sugars.
Oh, so that's what veraison is. I've always wondered about that.
And then finally, we reach harvest, the culmination of a year's work and the exciting start of the winemaking journey.
The grand finale. But all of this hinges on those 5 crucial elements that grapes need to survive, right?
You remember them. Heat, sunlight, water nutrients, and CO2. These are the building blocks of life for a grapevine.
Right. Okay, let's start with heat. I imagine it's pretty important for those grapes to ripen.
It is. Heat drives so many processes in the vine, from bud burst to flowering to ripening. Different grape varieties have different heat requirements, which is why you find certain grapes thriving in cooler climates while others need scorching sun.
So it's like each grape has its own Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not too cold, but just right.
Precisely. And this is where understanding the interplay of climate and weather becomes so important. Your sources make a clear distinction between the two.
Right. Climate is the long-term weather patterns, and weather is what we experience day to day.
Exactly. Both climate and weather play crucial roles in viticulture. Your sources highlight 4 main climate classifications: cool, moderate, warm, and hot.
And within each classification, you have all sorts of microclimates, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Factors like latitude, altitude, ocean currents, and even the direction of slope faces can create unique pockets of warmth or coolness within a region.
It's amazing how many variables come into play.
It really is. And grape growers need to be masters of understanding these nuances to ensure their grapes are getting the right amount of heat to thrive.
Okay, so we've got climate and weather influencing the temperature. What about sunlight? How does that factor into the equation?
Sunlight is essential for photosynthesis, the process by which plants convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars using energy from the sun.
So it's like sunlight is fueling those tiny sugar factories within the grapes.
Exactly. And just like with heat, different grape varieties need different amounts of sunlight to ripen properly.
So a grape grown in a sunny region might produce a sweeter wine than the same grape grown in a cloudier region.
That's right. And latitude plays a big role here too. The closer you are to the equator, the more intense the sunlight.
So it's like a giant sundial where every angle and degree matters.
Precisely. And skillful grape growers understand these nuances. They use techniques like pruning and canopy management to control how much sunlight reaches the grapes.
So it's not just about planting the vines and letting nature take its course. There's a lot of artistry involved.
Absolutely. Grape growing is a delicate dance between working with nature and guiding it in the right direction.
I'm starting to see why people say winemaking is as much art as it is science.
You're absolutely right. It's about observation, intuition, and a deep understanding of the natural world.
Okay, we've covered heat and sunlight, 2 down, 3 to go. Next up, water. All plants need water, but what about grapevines?
Water is essential for vine growth, of course.
Yeah.
But too much water can be a problem.
Really? Why is that? I thought more water meant happier plants.
Well, too much water can dilute the flavors in the grapes. And it can also lead to overly vigorous growth, which can actually shade the grapes and prevent them from ripening properly.
So it's like they're drowning in a sea of abundance.
It's all about finding the right balance. And the vine's water needs vary depending on its age, the climate, the soil type, and even the stage of the growth cycle.
So younger vines need more water than older vines.
Generally, yes. Younger vines are still establishing their root systems and need more water to grow. But mature vines are more drought tolerant.
So it's like they grow up and learn to handle their drink a little better.
A good way to think about it. And in many wine regions, irrigation is essential, especially in drier climates or during drought years.
So grape growers have to become water management experts too.
They do. And they're constantly monitoring soil moisture levels and weather patterns to make sure their vines are getting just the right amount of water.
Wow. It's like a constant balancing act.
It is. And that brings us to soil, the foundation of it all.
Soil. I know it's important, but what makes for good grape growing soil? Is it as simple as the richer the better?
Not necessarily. It's more nuanced than that. Soil acts as a reservoir for water and nutrients, both essential for vine health. And different grape varieties have different soil preferences.
Really? So tell me more about these soil preferences.
Well, soil is made up of various components: gravel, sand, silt, clay, and humus, which is the organic matter. The proportion of these components determines how well the soil drains and how much water it retains.
So like a sandy soil would drain quickly while a clay soil would hold on to water.
You got it. And the ideal soil type for grapes often depends on the climate. For example, in a hot, dry climate, a clay soil might be beneficial because it holds on to moisture better. But in a cooler, wetter climate, a sandy soil might be better to prevent the roofs from getting waterlogged.
So again, it's all about finding that perfect balance.
Exactly. And it's not just about water retention and drainage. Soil also provides essential nutrients that vines need to grow.
Like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium?
Those are the key players. And grape growers often do soil tests to see if their soil is deficient in any of these nutrients.
And if it is, they can add those nutrients through fertilization.
Precisely. It's like giving the vines a vitamin boost to ensure they're getting all the nourishment they need.
This is also fascinating. I never realized how much goes into growing grapes.
Okay, we've covered heat, sunlight, water, and soil. That leaves us with one final element: CO2. What's the deal with managing CO2 levels in vineyards? That's a great question. While there's generally enough CO2 in the atmosphere for photosynthesis, there's growing interest in boosting CO2 levels within vineyards to enhance vine growth and grape production.
Boosting CO2 levels, how do they do that?
There are a few ways. One is by planting cover crops between the vine rows. Cover crops help sequester carbon from the atmosphere and add organic matter to the soil, which improves soil health and also releases CO2 as it decomposes.
So it's like a natural way to increase CO2 levels in the vineyard.
It is, and some growers are even experimenting with techniques to directly increase CO2 concentrations around the vines, like using dry ice or capturing CO2 emissions from nearby industrial facilities.
Wow, so they're going to great lengths to optimize those CO2 levels. Sounds like grape growers are always innovating and pushing the boundaries.
They are, and it's exciting to see how these innovations are helping to create healthier, more productive vineyards and ultimately better wines.
Okay, so we've covered the 5 essential elements. Now, what about managing the vineyard itself? Your sources mentioned something called vine training systems. What are those all about?
Vine training systems are how grape growers guide the vine's growth to optimize for fruit quality and yield. They dictate the shape of the vine, how it's supported, and how the canopy is managed.
So it's like they're giving the vines a personalized workout plan.
That's a great way to think about it. There are 2 main approaches: bush vines and trellised vines. Bush vines grow as freestanding bushes without any support.
So they're just letting the vines grow wild and free.
In a sense, yes. This method is often used in hot, dry regions where the sprawling canopy can help shade the grapes from the intense sun, but it also makes harvesting more difficult.
Ah, so it's a trade-off between sun protection and ease of harvesting.
Exactly. And then there's the other approach: trellised vines.
Tell me about those. How do they work?
Trellised vines are trained to grow along a support structure usually made of wires and posts. This allows for greater control over the canopy, making it easier to prune, manage pests and diseases, and optimize sunlight exposure.
So it's like giving the vines a framework to grow on.
Exactly. And there are various trellising systems, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. The choice depends on factors like the climate grape variety and the wine style the grower is aiming for.
I bet. So it's another one of those decisions where there's no right or wrong answer. It just depends on the context.
You've got it. Now, once we have those vines trained and growing the way we want them, we need to talk about pruning.
Pruning. That sounds pretty important. I imagine it's more than just giving the vines a haircut.
It is. Pruning is all about removing unwanted canes and shoots to control the vine's size, shape, and yield. It's a year-round task with different goals for each season.
Okay, so walk me through the different types of pruning.
Well, during the dormant season, the focus is on shaping the vine and determining how many buds will be left to produce the next year's crop. There are 2 main styles of winter pruning: cane pruning and spur pruning.
Cane pruning and spur pruning. What's the difference?
Cane pruning involves leaving longer canes with more buds, while spur pruning cuts back canes to just a few buds, forming spurs on the cordon.
So it's like choosing between quantity and quality. More buds mean more grapes, but maybe lower quality.
Exactly. And the choice depends on the grape variety, the vigor of the vine, and the desired wine style. Some varieties naturally produce more fruit and need to be pruned more heavily to maintain quality.
It sounds like a delicate
It
balance.
is. And then there's summer pruning, which is all about fine-tuning during the growing season.
So it's like a mid-season checkup to make sure everything is on track.
Exactly. Summer pruning involves removing excess shoot sleeves and even grape bunches to ensure the remaining grapes get enough sunlight and nutrients.
So it's like they're thinning out the herd to make sure the strongest grapes survive.
A good analogy. And summer pruning is also an important part of canopy management, making sure the leaves aren't shading the grapes too much and that there's good airflow to prevent disease.
It seems like pruning and canopy management work hand in hand.
They do. It's all about creating the optimal environment for the grapes to ripen and develop those beautiful flavors.
Okay, so we've covered how vine training and pruning shape the growth of the vine. Now, what about planting density? How does that factor into the equation?
Yes, planting density. That refers to the number of vines planted per hectare. Higher density means more vines packed into the same space, which increases competition for water and nutrients.
So it's like creating a more competitive environment for the vines, making them work harder for their resources.
Exactly. And just like with humans, a little healthy competition can be a good thing. When vines have to compete, they tend to produce smaller yields, but the grapes are often of higher quality.
So it's that classic quality versus quantity trade-off.
Precisely. And the ideal planting density depends on many factors like soil fertility, water availability, climate, and the grape variety's vigor.
It's like a giant equation with all these different variables.
It is. And skilled grape growers take all these factors into account when deciding how many vines to plant per hectare.
This is all so incredibly complex. I'm starting to see why grape growing is considered such a specialized skill.
It definitely is. It's a constant dance between science, art, and intuition.
Speaking of an intricate dance, let's move on to the topic of harvesting. How do growers know when it's time to pick those grapes?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's not just about waiting until the grapes are sweet. Optimal harvest time is about finding that perfect balance of sugar, acidity, flavor, and tannin ripeness.
So it's not just about sugar levels. What else are they looking for?
Acidity is crucial. It gives the wine freshness and vibrancy. And then there are tannins, those astringent compounds that give red wines structure and aging potential.
So a grower making a crisp white wine might harvest earlier when the acidity is higher, while someone making a bold red might wait longer for those tannins to mellow out.
Exactly. And experienced growers use a combination of visual cues, taste tests, and lab analysis to determine when the grapes have reached that perfect point of ripeness.
It's like they're conducting a sensory evaluation, but for grapes instead of wine.
A great analogy.
Yeah.
And once they decide it's go time, how do they actually get those grapes off the vines?
Oh, good question. How does the harvest actually happen?
There are two main methods, machine harvesting and hand harvesting. Machine harvesting is faster and more efficient, especially for large vineyards. But machines aren't as selective as humans.
So machine harvesting is like using a giant vacuum cleaner to suck up all the grapes.
It's a bit more sophisticated than that. But you're right, machines can't distinguish between ripe and unripe grapes, or between grapes and leaves or other debris. So hand harvesting is still preferred for high-quality wines or vineyards with steep slopes or delicate grape varieties.
So it's another one of those decisions where there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Precisely. It all depends on the specific circumstances. Okay, before we move on to the next stage of the wine's journey, we need to talk about the constant battle that grape growers face, the battle against pests and diseases.
Oh, right. We talked about phylloxera, but what other villains are lurking in the vineyard?
Well, besides phylloxera, nematodes are a major concern. They're microscopic worms that attack the roots of the vines, weakening them and making them more susceptible to other problems.
So it's like a double whammy. The nematodes themselves cause damage, and they also weaken the vine's defenses.
Exactly. And then there are the more visible threats, birds and mammals who love to feast on those juicy grapes.
Ah, yes. I've seen those nets over vineyards. Are those mainly to keep birds away?
They are. Birds can decimate a crop if they're not kept in check. And mammals like deer rabbits and even wild boars can also cause significant damage.
So it's a constant battle to protect those precious grapes.
It is. But it's not just animals that pose a threat. Fungal diseases are a huge concern for grape growers, especially in humid climates.
Oh, right. I remember reading about powdery mildew and downy mildew. Those are fungal diseases, right?
They are. Powdery mildew creates a white powdery coating on the leaves and fruit, reducing photosynthesis and impacting grape quality. Downy mildew causes yellow spots on the leaves and can even lead to premature leaf drop.
So it's like a 1-2 punch of fungal fury.
Pretty much. And then there's Botrytis cinerea, a fungus that can be both a friend and a foe to grape growers.
Wait, a fungus that can be good. How does that work?
It's fascinating. In some conditions, Botrytis cinerea can cause gray rot, which ruins the grapes. But in other conditions, it can create noble rot, which concentrates the sugars and flavors in the grapes, leading to some of the world's most prized sweet wines.
Wow, so it's like a Jekyll and Hyde fungus. It can destroy or elevate depending on the circumstances?
Exactly. It all depends on the grape variety, the climate, and the stage of grape development.
This is why I love learning about wine. It's full of these surprising twists and turns.
It really is. Okay, so we've covered some of the main pests and diseases. Now, what about managing those threats? Is it all about spraying pesticides?
That's a good question. I know there's a growing movement towards more sustainable and organic approaches to grape growing.
There is. Let's talk about those. Starting with sustainable viticulture. Sustainable viticulture is all about minimizing the environmental impact of grape growing while still producing high-quality grapes.
So it's about finding that balance between environmental responsibility and economic viability.
Exactly. And sustainable viticulture takes a holistic approach. It's about considering the long-term health of the vineyard, the surrounding ecosystem, and the community.
So it's not just about the grapes, it's about the bigger picture.
That's right. Sustainable growers focus on things like soil health, water conservation, biodiversity, and reducing the use of synthetic chemicals.
So things like composting cover crops and integrated pest management.
Exactly. And then there's organic viticulture, which takes things a step further. Organic viticulture prohibits the use of synthetic pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers. So organic growers rely on natural methods to manage pest diseases and build soil fertility.
So they're using things like compost manure and beneficial insects to keep things in balance.
Precisely. And to be certified, organic growers have to meet strict regulations and undergo inspections to ensure they're meeting those standards.
So it's a way for consumers to know that the grapes were grown using practices that are good for the planet and their health.
That's the idea. And finally, we have biodynamic viticulture, the most demanding and philosophically driven approach.
Okay, biodynamic viticulture. I've heard the term, but I'll admit it's a bit of a mystery to me. What's the deal with biodynamics?
Biodynamic viticulture takes organic principles and adds a spiritual and cosmological dimension. It views the vineyard as a living organism interconnected with the rhythms of nature and the cosmos.
So it's like a blend of science and spirituality.
You could say that. Biodynamic growers use special preparations made from herbs, minerals, and animal manure to enhance soil and plant vitality. And they often time their practices according to the cycles of the moon and planets.
So they're aligning the vineyard with the rhythms of the universe?
Exactly. It's a demanding approach that requires deep knowledge and a commitment to working in harmony with nature. But many biodynamic growers believe that this approach results in wines that are more expressive of their terroir and have a unique energy and vitality.
Biodynamic viticulture definitely sounds like a labor of love.
Okay, I think we've laid a really solid foundation here. We've explored the basics of grape growing, from choosing the right varieties to understanding the challenges of climate, soil, and pests and diseases.
We've covered a lot of ground, and I think we're ready to move on to the next stage of the journey.
You mean the transformation of those grapes into wine?
That's right. The magic of winemaking awaits us. I can't wait. Welcome back to your deep dive into the world of wine. We've already unearthed the fascinating journey of grape growing from those tenacious roots to meticulous canopy management.
We've certainly covered a lot. And now it's time to move from the vineyard to the winery itself, to witness the transformation of those carefully cultivated grapes into the wines we love.
Right. We're finally getting to the good stuff. So tell me what happens when those precious grapes arrive at the winery.
The real alchemy begins. And the first act is all about processing those grapes. Sorting, destemming, and crushing.
Okay, sorting makes sense. You want to make sure only the best grapes make the cut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whether the grapes were hand-picked or machine harvested, there will always be some less than perfect ones. Unripe, damaged, or even stray leaves and debris that snuck in.
So you don't want those rogue grapes messing up the whole batch.
You got it.
Mm.
Then comes destemming, which is usually done for red wines.
Destemming? Why is that necessary?
Well, the stems contain tannins, which can add bitterness to the wine. So for most red wines, we remove the stems before fermentation.
That makes sense. I wouldn't want my Pinot Noir tasting like a mouthful of twigs.
Exactly. And then comes the fun part, Crushing.
Crushing. So this is where we finally get to release that precious juice.
It is. Crushing gently breaks the grape skins, releasing the juice and pulp. But it's not about pulverizing those grapes into oblivion.
So it's more of a gentle squeeze than a full-on grape massacre.
Precisely. The goal is to rupture the grapes just enough to get the juice flowing. Now, for white wines, the juice is separated from the skins almost immediately after crushing.
Ah, that makes sense. That's why white wines are typically lighter in color and body. They haven't had that extended skin contact.
Exactly. Red wines, on the other hand, are fermented with the skins, which gives them their color tannins and complex aromas.
So that's why red wines have more of that grippy mouthfeel.
That's right. Okay, so we've sorted, destemmed, and crushed. What happens next?
I'm on the edge of my seat. This is where the real magic happens, right?
You got it. Next comes fermentation, the heart of the winemaking process. This is where yeast converts the sugar in the grape juice into alcohol-producing carbon dioxide as a byproduct.
So those fermentation tanks are bubbling with activity fueled by microscopic yeast parties.
I like that description. And most winemakers use commercially cultivated yeast strains that are selected for their specific characteristics.
So it's not just any old yeast that can make wine.
Well, there are wild yeast present on the grapes and in the winery, but using commercial yeasts allows for more predictability and control over the fermentation process.
So it's like choosing the right yeast for the job, depending on the desired wine style.
Exactly. And once the yeast is added, the winemaker has to carefully monitor the fermentation process.
What are the key things they're watching for during fermentation?
Temperature control is crucial. Yeast is very sensitive to temperature, and different temperatures can influence both the speed of fermentation and the flavors that develop.
So again, it's all about finding that Goldilocks zone.
Precisely. Not too hot, not too cold, but just right for the yeast to do its thing. And different winemakers have different methods for temperature control. Some use stainless steel tanks with temperature control jackets, while others prefer oak barrels, which allow for a slower, more gradual fermentation.
So stainless steel offers precision and control, while oak adds a touch of rustic charm.
That's a good way to put it. And the choice of vessel can have a significant impact on the wine's final character.
I can imagine. So stainless steel would keep things clean and crisp, while oak would impart those vanilla spice and toasty notes.
Exactly. And besides temperature, winemakers are also monitoring the fermentation progress by measuring sugar levels and, of course, tasting the wine regularly.
So it's a blend of scientific data and sensory evaluation.
It is. The winemaker is both a scientist and an artist, using their knowledge and intuition to guide the process.
I love that. Okay, so once fermentation is complete, what happens next?
For red wines, there's often a second fermentation called malolactic fermentation, or MLF.
MLF, that sounds intriguing. What's that all about?
MLF is a process where bacteria convert malic acid, which is naturally present in grapes, and contributes to that sharp tartaric taste, into lactic acid, which is much softer and creamier.
So it's like smoothing out the rough edges of the wine's acidity.
Precisely. MLF softens the acidity and gives the wine a rounder mouthfeel. It also adds complexity, often with buttery or nutty notes.
Interesting. So this MLF is common for reds, but not for whites.
That's right. Most white wines benefit from that crisp, refreshing acidity from malic acid. But some winemakers do put certain whites, especially Chardonnay, through MLF to enhance those buttery, creamy notes.
So it's another one of those winemaking choices that depends on the desired style.
Exactly. Now, after fermentation and for reds, MLF, the next step is clarification.
Clarification, what does that involve?
Well, at this stage, the wine is still cloudy with yeast cells, grape solids, and other particles.
So it needs a little bit of tidying up.
Exactly. Clarification removes those suspended particles, making the wine clear and brilliant.
And how do they do that? Do they just run it through a giant coffee filter?
There are various methods. Some rely on natural processes like gravity settling, where the heavier particles slowly sink to the bottom of the tank. Others involve using fining agents.
Fining agents, what are those?
They're substances that are added to the wine to target and remove specific impurities.
So like little cleaning robots that go in and grab all the unwanted bits.
You could say that. Some common fining agents include bentonite, a type of clay that removes proteins, and even egg whites, which can help soften tannins.
Egg whites in wine? That's surprising.
It might sound strange, but it's a traditional fining method that has been used for centuries.
Wow, the things you learn. So after the wine has been clarified, what's next?
Next comes the time for the wine to truly mature, aging. This is where the wine develops complexity and character.
Aging. I've heard so much about that. What exactly happens during aging?
Well, some wines are aged in stainless steel tanks to preserve their fresh, fruity flavors, while others are aged in oak barrels to add those signature oaky notes.
So aging is like sending the wine to finishing school where it refines its personality.
I like that analogy. And the length of aging can vary greatly depending on the wine style, the grape variety, and the winemaker's intentions. Some wines are ready to drink within a year or two, while others might need decades to reach their full potential.
It sounds like aging is both an art and a science.
It is. It involves a complex interplay of chemical reactions that influence the wine's aroma, flavor, and texture over time.
I can only imagine. So once the wine has reached its desired level of maturity, what happens then?
Then comes the blending process. This is where the winemaker's skill and creativity truly shine.
Blending. This is where they get to play mad scientist, right?
Exactly. Blending is the art of combining wines from different grape varieties, vineyards, or even vintages to create a final product that transcends the sum of its parts.
So it's like they're composing a symphony of flavors.
That's a great way to put it. The blending process can be incredibly complex, involving countless tastings and subtle adjustments to achieve that perfect harmony.
It must take years of experience to develop that kind of palate and intuition.
It does. And once the blend is finalized, the wine is filtered to remove any remaining particles, and then it's bottled ready to begin its journey to your glass.
Wow, what a journey. It's amazing to think about all the steps involved in transforming those grapes into the wine we enjoy.
It is. But it's not always a smooth journey. Your sources also mention wine faults.
Wine vaults. Oh no, what are those?
Wine faults are flaws that can occur at any stage of the winemaking process. They can affect the wine's aroma, flavor, or appearance.
So it's like those pesky gremlins that can sneak in and sabotage a perfectly good bottle of wine.
Exactly. And there are some common culprits to watch out for. One of the most well-known is cork taint, which is caused by a compound called TCA that contaminates the cork and gives the wine a musty, cardboard-like smell.
Ugh, I've encountered that before. It's such a disappointment. So if a wine smells like wet cardboard, it's a sure sign of cork taint.
Most likely. And unfortunately, there's no way to fix it. The wine is essentially ruined.
That's heartbreaking. Okay, what other wine faults should we be aware of?
Oxidation is another major one. It occurs when the wine is exposed to too much oxygen, which causes it to turn brown and develop nutty or sherry-like flavors.
So it's like a slice of apple turning brown after being left out in the air.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And while some oxidation is desirable in certain wine styles like sherry, too much oxidation can make a wine taste flat and lifeless.
So again, it's all about balance.
Exactly. And then there are other faults like volatile acidity, which can give the wine a vinegary smell, and Brettanomyces, a type of yeast that can produce barnyard-like aromas.
Wow, so many things that can go wrong. It makes you appreciate the skill and expertise that goes into making a good bottle of wine.
You're absolutely right. But you know, even though wine faults can be frustrating, they also add to the complexity of wine. They remind us that wine is a living, evolving thing that's influenced by countless factors.
I like that perspective. Okay, so we've talked about what can go wrong during winemaking. Now let's talk about the amazing diversity of wine styles. Your sources mention all sorts of terms and classifications. Where do we even begin?
Well, one of the most fundamental distinctions is between still wines and sparkling wines.
Okay, that's a good starting point. Bubbles or no bubbles.
Exactly. And then another key distinction is between dry wines and sweet wines.
So dry wines would be those that have very little residual sugar.
That's right. Most of the sugar has been converted into alcohol during fermentation. So think of wines like Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignon, or Pinot Noir.
Okay, and then sweet wines would have varying levels of residual sugar ranging from off-dry to dessert-like sweetness.
Precisely. So you have your sweet Rieslings, your port wines, your ice wines, all sorts of delicious options.
I'm getting thirsty just thinking about it. Okay, so we have bubbles versus no bubbles and dry versus sweet. What other terms are used to describe wine styles?
Well, there's body, which refers to how the wine feels in your mouth, its weight and fullness.
So a light-bodied wine would feel delicate on the palate, while a full-bodied wine would feel richer and more substantial.
Yeah, exactly. And body's influenced by factors like alcohol content, tannin levels, and even the grape variety itself.
So a high-alcohol wine would typically be more full-bodied?
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
And tannins, those astringent compounds found in grape skins, stems, and seeds, also contribute to a wine's body and structure.
Ah, so that's why red wines tend to have more body than white wines? They've had that contact with the skins during fermentation.
Precisely. And then there's acidity, which is another important element. It adds freshness and vibrancy to the wine.
So a wine with high acidity would make your mouth water.
That's right. And acidity is influenced by factors like the grape variety, the climate, and the winemaking techniques. Wines from cooler climates tend to have higher acidity, while those from warmer climates typically have lower acidity.
So once again, it's all about balance.
Exactly. Body tannins and acidity all work together to create the wine's overall structure and texture.
And then, of course, there are the aromas and flavors, which are what make wine so captivating.
Ah, yes. The aromas and flavors. That's where the true magic lies. They can transport you to another place and time evoke memories and create a truly sensory experience.
It's like the wine is telling you its story.
I love that. And these aromas and flavors are influenced by so many things. The grape variety, the soil, the climate, the winemaking techniques.
Speaking of the soil and climate, I've heard the term terroir used a lot in the wine world. What exactly does terroir mean?
Terroir is a French term that encompasses the entire environmental context in which the grapes are grown. The soil, the climate, the topography, even the human traditions and practices specific to that region.
So it's like the wine's sense of place, its unique fingerprint.
Precisely. And many winemakers strive to make wines that express the terroir of their vineyards, showcasing the distinct qualities of their grapes and their region.
It makes you realize that wine is more than just a beverage. It's a reflection of a particular place and time.
Absolutely. And that's what makes wine so fascinating. It's a true expression of nature and culture.
Okay, before we move on to specific wine regions and grape varieties, I'm curious about the role of technology in all of this. Your sources mention how technology is changing the game in winemaking. Can you tell me more about that?
Absolutely.
Mm.
Technology is playing an increasingly important role, helping winemakers to better understand their grapes, control the winemaking process with greater precision, and create wines of exceptional quality.
So it's like giving winemakers a superpower toolkit.
That's a great way to put it. One example is precision viticulture, which involves using sensors, drones, and other high-tech tools to gather data on everything from soil moisture to grape ripeness.
So it's like having eyes and ears everywhere in the vineyard, allowing for real-time monitoring and more informed decision-making.
Exactly. And this data can be used to optimize irrigation, fertilization, pest control, and even harvesting, ensuring that each vine receives exactly what it needs.
It's like giving each vine its own personalized care plan.
Precisely. And technology is also transforming the winemaking process itself. Temperature-controlled fermentation tanks offer precise control over temperature, leading to more consistent and predictable outcomes.
So it's taking some of the guesswork out of the equation.
That's right. We also have advanced filtration systems that can remove unwanted particles without stripping away flavor or aroma, and high-tech bottling lines that minimize the risk of oxidation or contamination.
It's incredible to think how much technology has advanced in recent years. It's like winemaking has entered a new era.
It has, and it's exciting to see how these innovations are helping to create even better wines for us to enjoy.
I'm ready for a glass now. How about you?
Me too. Cheers to that.
Cheers. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our journey through the world of wine, and I have to say I'm feeling pretty inspired.
Me too.
Yeah.
We've covered so much ground from those tiny little grapes to those complex winemaking decisions.
Right. It's made me realize just how much goes into every bottle of wine we enjoy.
It really is a fascinating journey from vine to glass.
Yeah.
And speaking of journeys, there was one story from your sources that I keep thinking about. The story of phylloxera.
Ah, yes, the phylloxera epidemic. It's a story that every wine lover should know. It's a reminder of how fragile the world of wine can be.
Exactly. Just imagine it. European vineyards are flourishing. Wine production is booming. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, this tiny insect arrives from North America and throws everything into chaos.
Phylloxera, the microscopic villain that almost changed the course of wine history.
It almost did. This aphid-like insect feeds on the roots of grapevines, and European vines, primarily Vitis vinifera, were completely defenseless against it.
So it's like an invasive species wreaking havoc on an unsuspecting ecosystem.
Precisely. And the consequences were devastating. Vineyards withered and died, wine production plummeted, and entire wine regions faced economic ruin.
It's hard to even imagine the scale of the crisis. It must have been a truly dark time for the European wine industry.
It was, but it's also a story of resilience and ingenuity. Once scientists identified the culprit, the search for solutions began.
So they knew the enemy, but they didn't know how to fight it.
Exactly. They tried everything they could think of, flooding the vineyards, injecting the soil with chemicals, but nothing seemed to work.
It must have felt like a losing battle.
It did for a while. But then a breakthrough came from a rather unexpected source, American grapevines.
Right. We talked about how American grape species aren't typically used for winemaking because of their flavor profile, but they had something that European vines desperately needed.
They did. American grapevines had evolved alongside phylloxera, and developed a natural resistance to it. They had thicker bark on their roots and a sticky sap that gummed up the phylloxera's feeding apparatus.
So they were like the botanical superheroes of the grape world.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And this discovery led to a brilliant solution, grafting European Vitis vinifera vines onto American rootstock.
So they basically gave those delicious European vines the armor they needed to survive.
Precisely. It was a long and arduous process, but eventually, most European vineyards were replanted with these grafted vines, and the wine industry slowly recovered.
It's a truly remarkable story. It shows how sometimes the answer to a problem can come from the most unexpected places.
I completely agree. And this legacy lives on today as rootstock continues to play a vital role in viticulture worldwide, even in regions that aren't directly affected by phylloxera.
It's amazing to think that this tiny insect that almost destroyed an entire industry actually led to a deeper understanding of grapevines and a more resilient approach to viticulture.
It's a testament to the power of observation, innovation, and collaboration.
Well, I think we've successfully harvested all the knowledge from this deep dive. We've explored the fascinating world of grape, growing from the microscopic level to the global challenges of pests and climate change.
We've uncovered the intricate decisions that grape growers face every day, and we've seen how their passion, dedication, and resilience have shaped the wines we enjoy.
And now I'm feeling inspired to go out and explore the world of wine with a newfound appreciation for all the hard work and artistry that goes into every bottle.
That's wonderful. And remember, the world of wine is vast and ever-evolving, so keep exploring, keep tasting, and keep learning.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Cheers to that.
Cheers.